When comedian Adam Hills decided to write his memoir, the idea for the title came first. It's called Best Foot Forward, and it plays on the fact that Adam was born without a right foot. But for an accidental comedian, it took years to find a way to make his disability funny. I spoke to him earlier. Adam Hills, nice to have you on the program.
Great to see you again.
Well, the book's called, Best Foot Forward, so we should deal with the best foot forward from the start. I love the way you deal with this early in the book, because you go, OK, this is what happened, this is how I was born, this is the problem, and that's all I'm going to say about the foot for right now, because it's really not that important.
Well, yeah, I kind of, as I wrote it, do you know what? In all honesty, I kind of came up with the name first. I thought that'd be a great name for a book, and it was originally
now I have to write a book.
Yeah. Well, now I have to find a narrative that fits the name of the book. So I had started writing this book years ago. It was mainly just going to be stories of stand-up comedy. And to be honest, I've not said this to anyone, but the original name of the book was going to be Hyped Up and Full of Wee.
Oh, OK.
Because that's how I always feel right before a gig.
Yeah.
I'm hyped up, I need to go to the toilet 7 or 8 times. And for some reason, I thought that was a really funny name for a book about stand-up comedy. But gradually, and so I started writing it about 15 years ago when I was touring, and it was all the stories of a stand-up comic. It was before I was on Spicks and Specks, so no one knew who I was. And I took it to some publishers at the time, and they said, it's great, but no one knows who you are. So maybe wait till you get famous and write a bit more.
And you have to deal with the foot early on, don't
exactly,
you?
Yeah.
Get it out of the way.
And I think even at that point, I'd only just started talking about my prosthetic foot on stage anyway, so it wasn't a big part of my act. And then about a year and a half ago, when it came time to actually write the book, I took it to some publishers and I said, I've written a book. And they said, no, you've written half a book. We want to hear about what happens once you get on TV and covering the Paralympics, and we want to hear about your prosthetic foot. So that's when I went, right, I'm going to call it Best Foot Forward.
But it's even interesting to know what to say. I know you use the word amputee, don't you? But that's not really the right word either, because it's not an amputation.
No, it's a birth deformity, and that just does not sound in any way as cool as amputee. Amputee's much better. So I think if I was in the Paralympics, I'm pretty sure the description of my disability would be the French word les autres, which I think means the others.
Right.
Because there's no real category. It's like, well, you're an amputee and you're short-statured and you've got cerebral palsy and we don't really know what you are. We're just going to call you the others.
And, of course, you have played sport, and you played sport just recently for Warrington with one of the greatest Australian rugby league players of all time, Andrew Johns, in your team.
I've had the most amazing 12 months. It was 12 months ago I found out there was a South Sydney Rabbitohs physical disability rugby league team. And I contacted them and said, OK, 2 things. Can I support the team and can I play? And to be honest, that was really the first thing I wanted to ask. I said, can I play? And they said, well, no, because we're in Redfern and you're in London, and that's a long way to commute. So I went, OK, well, what can I do to help? And they said, well, Warrington want to set up the first ever English disability rugby league club. Maybe you can help them out. So I offered some support. I had a trial game with them. I was accepted onto the team. I've been training every Tuesday this year. We've played 5 games in England. Wow. I got myself knocked out in one of them, making a tackle.
Earned your stripes.
Absolutely earned my stripes. And then last week we played against the South Sydney Rabbitohs to be the World Club Champions. Yeah. And it's been this remarkable thing, because I did play rugby league when I was a kid. Yeah. And there's a story in the book, and I found it. So when I was about 12, I was asked if I would try out for the Disabled Games, it was called. Not the Paralympics, because that sounds cool. The Disabled Games. And I said no for a number of reasons. Firstly, I didn't think I was disabled. I thought, I'm only missing a tiny bit of my foot. It's not fair. You know, I didn't realise there were categories. I thought I'd be running against someone who's missing 2 legs. But also, none of the sports that I liked doing, which were either tennis or rugby league, were in the Paralympics. So I said no. And then in 2008, I covered the Paralympics for ABC, and it opened my eyes to what it was. And then in 2012, when I saw GB Paralympics team come out onto the Olympic Stadium with You Can Be Heroes by David Bowie blasting and fireworks going off. I looked back to the 12-year-old me and went, you did the wrong thing. You made the wrong call.
Well, you did. You can say that, but you didn't make the call into comedy. I love what your mother said when you said, I'm going to comedy, but you're not funny.
I think I've done more mental scarring to her by using that as the opening line of the book. I keep saying to her, Mum, I don't mind. It's fine. It was a joke.
But when did you realise you were funny?
Oh, wow. I knew I wanted to be funny before I knew or thought I was funny, if that makes sense. So I loved being funny at school. I remember being on a flight when I was about 8 and listening to the in-flight comedy channel, and Victor Borge was a Danish concert pianist and comedian, and had a routine about phonetic punctuation, about how punctuation should have noises, so when you're talking, people know you've come to the end of a sentence. So a full stop would be and a question mark would be and I was fascinated by it, and I listened to it over and over and over on the plane, and I think I just fell in love with comedy.
And you sort of stumbled into it professionally, didn't you? Ostentatious, who was very well known, of course, for Australiana, he was late. They thought he wasn't going to turn up, and you got a chance. What was that like?
At that point, I had performed maybe twice, and they hadn't gone well. The first time, I mean, I just did dirty blue jokes that were someone else's, and all my mates thought it was hilarious. And then the second time, I was heckled off stage, and so I was at that point of going. And I think you need that early on as a comedian, because it tests whether or not you really want to do it. If it goes really well all the time, then there's no test there. And even after that second one, when I was booed off, I was like, no, I still want to do this. And so I went to watch a friend perform with Ostentatious in Chullora, I think the Palms Hotel in Chullora. And Austin was late, and they said, well, we need someone to fill, can you do 5 minutes? So I did the 5 minutes that I'd been working on, but it worked this time, for the first time ever. And that was the first time I ever told a joke that got a round of applause.
And then you were hooked.
I defy any addict to say that there's something stronger than that, because once you've got that, you're just chasing that feeling for the rest of your life.
Isn't it amazing, you know, I was just reading the book, how often Billy Connolly sort of turns up. Tell us about that connection that you made and why he seems to always be there.
I'm not entirely sure. He's kind of become like my hairy godmother.
It is a hairy character.
So it started, the first time I met him was outside the Sydney Opera House when I was about 19. I went to see his show and he was there, and we just had a very quick chat. But I remember him saying, because there was another comedian there who said, why don't you come to our show? And he said, oh no, I find if I watch another comedian, I steal their jokes, and I don't mean to. But I remember him being really lovely and friendly. And then about 10 years later, I was working in Adelaide on radio, and I got to take some listeners backstage. And this was the big moment with Billy Connolly, where everyone was too nervous and they all clammed up. And so he said to me, oh, you work in radio, do you? And I said, I do, but I'm actually a stand-up. And he went, oh my God, did you like my show? Oh, great, do it, you'll love it. It's the best job in the world. It gets easier as you go along. And then he started telling me all this advice. Silence is your best friend. When they're silent, they're listening. When they're coughing, they hate you. And all this stuff. And I remember him walking down the hallway, pumping his fist in the air, going, do it, just do it. So then cut forward another, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I was at the London Comedy Store. And I'd been asked to make the decision between comedy and radio. And I remember a program director saying, you have to choose one of them. You know, it's not... It's going to happen at some point in your career. Where's your heart at? And I just heard this, just do it, just do it. So I followed stand-up comedy, and I ended up at the London Comedy Store, and he just happened to turn up. The only night he's ever been in the London Comedy Store, I was closing the show. And so I told the whole story on stage to this, like, he was like Santa in the audience. It was like the big grey beard. And I told the whole story, and I said, Billy, I'm so thankful that you told me that, and that's why I'm here. And then he came backstage, and I thought, oh, maybe it's a bit over the top. And he just kicked open the door and went, you did it! I'm so proud of you! And
amazing that sort of generosity too, you know, from someone who could have said, oh, yeah, you know, come back to me when you're actually funny. But,
well, I would imagine anyone that's come across Billy, I would imagine anyone in comedy has a similar experience to me, because he came backstage that night and he looked at every single act that was on the bill and said, oh, I loved what you did, and then looked at this magician and went, you're going to be huge and you're my favourite. And like, he knew what it meant to people to be praised by Billy Connolly, I think.
Interesting too, when you're learning about when do you make a joke about the disability. And you got that advice into you, don't do it too soon, because that's all you'll ever be.
Do you know what? I knew nothing about the industry, but I listened to the right people, I think. And there was a guy early on, and it was probably in about the first year of me performing, and I made a joke about my foot purely because there was an early show and a late show, and the audience had come back from the early show to the late show, and I'd run out of jokes. I didn't have any more material, so I went, oh, I've got an artificial foot, and I did a joke about it. And there's a really, to be an absolute comedy nerd, the joke wasn't all that good. The joke was, and it was based on truth, I'd been at a party and I said, I've got an artificial foot, and a woman said, can you still have sex? And I think, what a remarkable question to ask. So I said that on stage and it got a laugh and it was fine. And this older comedian said to me afterwards, look, you're not good enough to talk about your foot yet. He said, at the moment, you just make a joke because you can. He said, you need to work out how to make a joke, how to make the right joke. It's going to take years to play your trade. And then work out why you want to talk about your foot. He said, when you've got all that, then you can talk about it. So I didn't for years. And September 11, 2001, I mean, we know what happened on that day, but 3 days later I had to go through an airport and I was expecting the security to be all over it because my foot sets off metal detectors, which it did, and the Heathrow security guard came over and patted me down, but when he found out it was a prosthetic, he went, oh, I'm so sorry, go through. And I was like, no, do you want to, maybe you should check it. No, go, mate, go. And I wrote a joke then and I went, right, now I have to talk about it because firstly, I've been doing this now for 14 years at that point. But secondly, there's a reason to talk about it, and it's to let people know it's okay to ask questions. It's okay. You know, I'd much rather make sure, lift my jeans and let someone check my leg than think, well, maybe they're being a bit lax with security. And so the joke I wrote specifically for that was the security guard looked at me with a look on his face that said, I don't care if the plane goes down, I don't want to offend a spastic. And I purposely used that word because I wanted to convey the idea of someone so desperate to say the right thing that he still says the wrong thing. And then I ended up thinking back on that story about can you still have sex? And this is the perfect example of what 14 years of comedy can do. Because instead of just telling the audience what happened, I then said, I mean, what a ridiculous question you ask. Can you still have sex? You know, I looked at her and felt like saying, well, yeah, what does your boyfriend do? Does he have a run-up? And that little bit on the end, that's the difference 14 years of comedy can make. From going, hey, a funny thing happened to my foot, to, and now I'm going to say a funnier thing off the back of it.
Well, you can make a joke about it now. And your mother was wrong. It's been a pleasure, Adam.
Can I just point out for the record, she has been so encouraging ever since that day.
Well, she may have given you the right advice. You know, you proved her wrong.
Do you know what? If she'd been encouraging, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. Good on you, mate. Good to see you.
Thank you.